NYC.rb, hello. How are you today? Great evening. I love to see you here. Thank you for coming back. Thank you for joining us here for the first time. We are at the office of EXO Group. This is my company. And what we do is we manage a suite of lifestyle applications, I'll call them. So one of our main ones is called The Knot. And that's something that people tend to use when they're trying to get married and they are looking for advice and they're looking for inspiration and they're looking for vendors who can actually provide them with the services for that big day. Who here has been married at least once? All right, got a group of people here. We also have sort of similar on the vein where Gig Masters is a thing that you'd use to book your crazy 35th birthday party that requires a marching band to follow you around Williamsburg all day long. That's where you'd find that. So again, Marketplace connects vendors, connects with people, and we're in between trying to make money by making everything more efficient. And we're also hiring. So I'm a director of software engineering here, and we have a few roles open. One role off the top of my head is working with our design systems team. We call them core front end, and they've recently revamped some of our UIs, not on exactly as aggressive schedule as you, but some others are, we have a team that works on our APIs, so working with member data, working with things that relate to member data, technologies there, Ruby, Rails, Mongo, and now some Elixir. Right, Eugene? Eugene's from that team. Okay, so love to see you all here. We have a short, so we have two things coming up. One is I wanted to showcase some other Ruby events around town. I love Neon apparently, but tomorrow there's a Ruby roundtable. Their talk is around encryption and security. Pretty sure some things around GDPR are being mentioned there because a lot of companies are retooling their stuff right now. There's a Rails Bridge workshop coming up, so for those of you who are perhaps newer to Ruby, newer to Rails, or on the mentor side, this event is for you. There are pretty great events. It's, I believe it's a Friday evening and all Saturday, and you just get to get into it. All right, the next link is, if you'd like to submit a talk from next to NYC.rb, click here. Where is here? I have to click that link. I should be clicking these links. Okay, cool. We're trying to make it, so here's the problem. I made a call out for talks, I think sometime in very late April or even early May, and a few people came back to us and then we came back to them. We were never sure if they got our message. Did you ever get that feeling? You don't know if the other person gets your message? Are they ignoring me? Anyway, I realized it just in the last couple of months running this meetup is that meetup.com is not totally perfect. If you work at meetup.com, talk to me. I have a friend who works there. He told me our thing that sends messages is not totally perfect. So here, we've always had this like GitHub repo. It's NYC.rb, and then DevPunks is our kind of like community recording thing that we're thinking about. It's still a work in progress, but basically like the talks that we record here, they're going to go on that thing. But anyway, before that, issues, GitHub issues, that's something that's familiar to pretty much all developers now. And I've never lost a comment on an issue. It's never been like, oh, Dimitri, did you see my comment? Did you see that pull request? Just like, yes. Yep, it's there. Guaranteed. Anyway, that's for like future talks. And how come that's small? All right, the next big thing in June that I think is really important is the Go Ruko conference on June 16th. That's sort of, I think I sent out an email, but I call this like the sister conference to this meetup, but it's basically like one of the big events that New York City has held for the last 12 years. The talks are Ruby, some of the talks around the Ruby ecosystem. They're all super interesting, and I am super biased because I also helped select them. So I know they're good. Yeah, so go to goruko.com, click the link to buy a ticket. We will see you there. We also have a discount code. So if you're totally like, okay, I'm down for this, just see me like after this whole shindig and I'll write it down so you can get a discount. Okay, I think that's it for the intro. And up next, we have Chris. Chris, tell us something about yourself. Tell me fun fact or not fun fact. You have a choice.
I'll say Jay-Z used to be my boss.
That's a fun fact. All right, click share. I think you're not sharing it. Yeah, talking to that one. Nice.
All right. All right. Well, thanks, Dimitri. I am going to reprise the talk that I gave at RailsConf last week about how the team at Betterment secretly swapped the entire front end of several of our apps to launch our new brand identity. So my name is Chris LoPresto. I lead front-end architecture there at Betterment. And I really love helping engineering and design teams find ways to work better together. As you can see, I play some non-computer keyboards as well. And you can find me at Chris LoPresto on Twitter, GitHub, Hotmail, you name it, I should be there. So last year, Betterment spent 6 months creating a new brand identity. That was reimagining everything from the company's mission statement and photography style to the logo and color palette, all the way to the entire user interface for a bunch of our web and mobile apps, online calculators, emails, everything had to change. So from start to launch, this entire project took 6 months. The first few of which involved research, weighing different design decisions from the agency, picking one, running with it. So it was in the last 2-month stretch when we built everything. Now, this is obviously an aggressive timeline, and we did it to ourselves. The agency had said to expect at least 12 months for the brand exercise. So we said, what if we cut that in half? And we'll aim for Betterment's birthday at the end of May. It'll be great. You know, it's after tax season because we don't want to freak anyone out, have their tax forms suddenly look different. But it's before the summer because, let's face it, nobody reads press releases from the beach. We figure the worst that happens, we have to delay a little bit. So in March, our homepage looked like this. But by May, we wanted to snazz it up a lot. You know, new colors and photography and content throughout all of Betterment.com. We also wanted to apply this brand across our retail app. This is what the main dashboard page looked like. This is what we wanted it to look like. Now, investing involves risk. Past performance does not guarantee future results, but this user does look like they're in for a good 2 months. It's about $400,000, I think. So this is our portfolio page. Basically, the project requirements were like, you see that over there? Yeah, can't look that way anymore. So if this seems wildly impractical, what we kind of told ourselves was, buckle up. So our mission, simply stated, was to redesign everything in 8 weeks in secret. We wanted a timed big reveal so that all of our apps would change at the same time, articles would appear online, and then we would just bask in the beauty of our brand new brand. And then we thought, well, if we already have to touch everything anyway, while we're in the neighborhood, what if we made everything responsive? Because, you know, never waste a crisis. So what are we talking about? This is what we're talking about. In March, it's not really looking so good. These designs were never built to work at small sizes like this. So it's going to take a lot of work to turn it into this. We basically knew that we would need to reconstruct all of our CSS and all of our HTML. So you're thinking like by May, that's going to be fine. We'll just whip out our trusty feature flag framework, design system, and get to work. So at this point, it does help if you already have one of each. Luckily, we do. If you don't worry. Hopefully the story piques your interest. The thing about big projects is that they're risky, in part because they change a ton of code. One of the best ways we cope with that risk is to slice the work into tiny pieces. deliver one at a time. That means shipping incomplete work, but that's okay. We hide it from our users until it's ready behind the feature flag. Once it's ready, flip a switch, turn it on. That lets us solve problems as they pop up one at a time, lets us change our mind a lot without jerking our users around. But the rebrand is just so big, it touches everything. So how can we put everything behind a feature flag? And at first we didn't know how. But our core engineering principles dictated that we had to find a way. Because the only way to have a worry-free launch day was to not ship any code on that day. And instead just get to a point we were happy with and flip a switch, turn it on. So our feature flag framework is called Test Track. We built it, it's open source. Follows visitors and users across devices. We have clients for Rails and JavaScript and mobile apps. And we use it all the time to run experiments and dark deploy features. If you don't, you should definitely consider this. There's a few gems that make it really easy to get going. It'll change your life. But slicing up work into tiny pieces doesn't do much good if each slice ruins the last one, which is often the case when CSS is involved. So for this project especially, we knew that we needed to assemble a bunch of interfaces on the fly, see what worked, see what didn't. And the only way to do this creatively and efficiently is with a component-oriented design system so that we'd have reusable building blocks. Now our design system is called Style Closet. Lets us share patterns and components, Betterment's look and feel. If you don't yet have a design system, no problem. We actually had to rewrite ours entirely as part of this project. The important thing to remember though, is that Test Track and Style Closet were both already integrated into all of our apps. Because that's the only way that this 8-week project timeline was even remotely possible. We basically invested in our systems for years. It kind of put us in this position where what once would have been deemed wildly impractical could actually form the basis of our project plan. But at the start of the project, we didn't know how any of this was going to turn out. We were just wondering, like, how in the world are we going to do this? And forget Gantt charts and press releases. We needed a halfway believable way to get this thing out the door. So how can we get from here to there at all? All the engineers said, I don't know. But also just spike, do something. It doesn't matter how dumb your prototype is, as long as it's concretely dumb. Which is why I always ask myself, what's the dumbest thing that could possibly work? And this is what we came up with. We said, all right, we already ship a design system into each app. What if we make a rebranded version of it, ship that? What if we make a second CSS manifest, uses the rebranded system, and tuck that behind a feature flag? And then finally, this is the big one, we knew that the responsive designs would require a different markup. So what if we added some view logic that understood the feature flag and knew how to keep our two worlds separate, the stuff currently in production and then all of the new rebranded stuff. So this all seemed reasonable enough, so we got to work. Spent about 1 minute writing this beautiful rebrand CSS that you see here. I wanted something garish because I wanted to have fun with the designers, so I figured that this white on blue ought to do. And I wrote some JavaScript to toggle on the new rebrand style sheet in our doc site for the design system. So with the old styles, our typography demo had looked like this, but with my vastly improved styles, it now looked like this. Totally nailed it. So I began to walk up to the designers one by one and tell them I'd started the rebrand project, and they'd get really excited. And then I'd show them this, and then the looks on their faces varied. But we had what we needed, which was a way to do style stuff, like new style stuff, without messing up the old style stuff. And we shipped it as a minor version release of Style Closet, our design system. So our next step at this point was to try to get this dumb stuff into our real Rails apps behind the feature flag. So we upgraded our retail app to the latest version of Style Closet, and we made this new rebrand SaaS manifest that imported the new system. So this is what we want behind the feature flag. In the application layout, we just added this simple logic. Just said, If the test track feature flag rebrand enabled is true, use the new styles. Otherwise, use the other styles. This flag was initially off, so all of our users in public are not going to see this nonsense. But the engineers working on the project, or anyone else keeping tabs, could use our test track Chrome extension, flip rebrand enabled to true, and then see these lovely new styles. And we shipped this to production, like day one of the project. Come launch day, all we had to do is log into the test track admin site, flip this feature flag to go live with the brand for everybody. Now, the designers, being a serious bunch, already made me make my colors mildly less ridiculous. But as you can sort of see, this is holding together-ish so far. So for our last trailblazing trick, we're going to juggle old and new markup at the same time. So I ported the CSS for a few of our cleaner, more modern components in the design system, like the header, the progress bar, and footer that you see here. And I set about making this demo page work in both the old and new worlds. And this is where things started to get a little weird. We had CSS selectors that referenced colors, but the colors had all changed. So even for this really silly reason, we were adding logic to decide what markup we would get. And there were much bigger changes coming that would affect the markup. I mean, starting with the SVG logo and the new grid system that we were going to use, but lots bigger stuff down the road with the design rearranging content. But getting hacky and hand wavy, this end result is pretty good so far. So we decided to push ahead and see if this would all work in a real world situation. And in an hour, we had an answer. It did not. So even on the simple pages, like crash. So like most Rails apps, you use layouts to share page structure and partials to share markup. So even to hack this far, I needed a lot of logic in a lot of places to let a user get through the flow that you see here. And so far, this is just a reskin. Like I said, the new designs were going to rearrange all of this content. So I found myself transfixed by this ginormous SVG with all of this on my mind. No longer so sure we were going to be able to share one set of markup. So to recap, we wanted to ship a rebranded design system, and we did it. There's lots of work to do, but we're off to the races. We wanted to use the new system styles in an app behind a feature flag. Went great. It's live in production. As for the view logic necessary to set up our new rebrand world, though, nope. It's way too complicated. Not going to work. But the good news is we're transitioning out of that terrifying feeling at the start of a project when all we know is there's a bunch of things we don't know, followed by a bunch more things we don't know. But that pile of unknowns is best faced head on, early. If we strike out and blaze a trail, we'll make sure one way or another that we can get where we need to be. So we have our styles figured out, but our tangled view logic showed us that what we really need is a separate view layer for our feature flag. Because all our problems would go away if we could just add a rebranded version of a view without touching the existing one, and just have a bit of logic that determined which one to show. This is a specific requirement for which Rails has a great approach built right in. Action-packed variants. So whether we realize or not, we all know what the Rails template resolver is. When a Rails controller renders a request, the resolver knows where to find the right view. So that's controller path / show.html.rb. What I didn't know at the time was that after the HTML format, the resolver checks for an optional variant that you can define in your app. So let's say you had a website that serves colorful high-res pictures of robots. And you notice a lot of traffic coming from experimental Kindle browsers, and all this beautiful color is wasted on them. They can't see it. So you decide to optimize images for their black and white existence. So the controller could do a browser check and say, hey, the Kindle making this request, which would be awesome, and specify request.variant equals Kindle. And the resolver will first look for the Kindle template. And if it doesn't find it, it'll fall back to the plain HTML ERB that it's been showing the rest of us humans all along. This is built right into Rails. So luckily, when I said out loud, what we really need is a separate view layer for our feature flag, a coworker of mine matter-of-factly replied, we could use a variant. So all we had to do was move that one rebrand enabled check from our application layout into our application controller. This set of few lines of code, and we were in business. And we were really excited because we realized that we wouldn't have to make any changes to existing views for the entire project. We'd actually just be able to delete the old ones after we launched. It was additive and therefore completely safe to just make a new rebranded version of a thing, which meant we couldn't break anything even if we tried. Challenge accepted. Obviously, we could, we did. But the bugs ended up being real bugs about real features. They didn't have anything to do with project config gotchas or ceremony. So our focus shifted to all the actual stuff that needed changing. So we audited our design system. All of our apps came up with this ridiculously long list of pages and components that either needed to be reworked or rebuilt entirely. As we thought about how long it would take, we knew that something had to give. Style Closet, our design system, began life as a way to share patterns across apps, but it was tough going from the get-go because the apps were never built with the system in mind. So components never just worked when you dropped them in. Basically because our apps all had these complicated CSS code bases that few braved and even fewer loved. I included Captain Sully Sullenberger on this slide to kind of assure us everything's going to be okay. Because the fact of the matter is, as this peer-reviewed, totally factual study indicates, CSS is hard. And it only gets harder as the code base grows and as the team grows. Our old system suffered all the usual pitfalls associated with CSS global scope. You introduce a new thing, something else breaks. So we'd compensate, scope our rules more strictly in a show of strength. That doesn't stop someone else from making their change more important than yours, though. And then perhaps most insidious is that notion that these so-called reusable components, you actually have to use them at your own risk. But swapping out our entire view layer, what we were doing, represented an opportunity to start fresh with a new CSS architecture. And that is why we decided to rewrite our design system. Now this was big, but it was not out of the blue. We had been working towards this for a while. We had a bunch of internal prototypes, and we drew inspiration from lots of fantastic open source projects, untold numbers of Medium articles. And we were confident enough to make the leap because we knew by this point that it would be faster to build a new system than continue to fight our old one. So we put together a wish list. Sensible defaults. We didn't want apps to have to configure anything to get going. We wanted default element styles is basically our Twitter bootstrap so that semantic markup would automatically look good. We wanted cohesive systems for spacing, typography, grid, breakpoints, color, and the ability to apply those system patterns consistently in our Sass code, but also using utility classes in our markup. And finally, a suit CSS naming convention, it's like BEM, so that our components could defend against inward and outward bleed to achieve true reuse. So let's dive in. We're going to go overly quickly through a whole bunch of stuff that we built. We created an exponential spacing scale whose increments are all multiples of 4 that are used to create the spatial relationships within components throughout our layouts. Any space that you perceive in any of our interfaces is derived from this system. We also provided new unit-tested Sass functions to apply, let's say, paddings or margins using an SC spacing function that you see here. For assembling page markup in apps, we provided corresponding utility classes built using those same Sass functions to apply the rules using utility class selectors, which you see here, without needing to write any additional CSS in the app. We got this new fancy color palette. Created a conventional naming scheme to support functional access in Sass And we created color and background color utility classes. We had 5 primary colors, 4 secondary variants of each. And for Betterment's complex data visualizations, we generated a gradient color system with 100 color stops for each primary color. Our previous responsive efforts had used this ad hoc set of max width media queries. We took the opportunity to flip that. We researched and standardized on a much simpler set of 2 min width media queries. And constraining this breakpoint set allowed us to create responsive versions of each utility class. So it was easy to specify a default padding and then, let's say, loosen it for larger viewports and still not have to write any CSS in that. We created a linear scale of typography sizes. Based on the spacing scale, we had font size and line height combinations optimized for our new font. We could adjust line heights and some of the header and font sizes responsively. And in keeping with our goal for semantic markup, looking good by default, we created a vertical rhythm, default bottom margins for typographic elements. Again, based on the spacing scale, adjusted responsively. You can sense the theme emerging. Created a 12-column grid system based on flexbox with fixed width gutters based on the spacing scale, adjusted responsively. This is fun. Inspired by the Dropbox paper team, we designed a new icon set in Sketch on conventional artboards. We wrote a script that uses Sketch tool to export SVG files, optimize them, and generate view partials and corresponding Rails helpers. So designers can change or add icons at any time by updating the sketch file and opening a pull request. And engineers can pop them on the page using this SC icon helper. And recently we made this interactive icon builder in our docs site so that engineers can generate the ERB for the icon that they're looking for. We built all the traditional components, design system classics like card and button. And for the first time though, these components were all truly reusable. Thanks to the suit CSS naming conventions we employed, we could drop them in anywhere, in any app. They would all play nicely with each other. We also built layout components with built-in content slots. These components served a dual purpose. It made it easy for teams to start building responsive web pages. It also did the heavy lifting for taking stacked content slots, putting them on the grid at larger viewport sizes, and served as examples for the teams when they were building their own components that needed to be reusable using our new CSS package. And then we built these snazzy visualization tools to visualize the content slots in the underlying grid. Everything you're looking at are actually all browser screenshots visualized by our Style Closet Chrome extension. So that made it really easy to see if stuff was actually laid out correctly. As we built out each new piece, we could check our work. Suffice it to say, action-packed, productive few weeks. We had all of this queued up. We just took the time to throw together a prototype rapidly with a small sort of task force. And this had, like this period of time, we had unprecedented levels of collaboration between our engineering and design teams. For the first time, we had designs expressed by a system built with the system. And as teams began to use the system, we immediately noticed a step change in the pace of UI development. Pages that used to take a day to assemble sprang to life in under an hour. Engineers ended their demos saying, I didn't write any CSS, and it's responsive. Now, I don't want to paint too rosy of a picture. There was a learning curve and a lot of work. But at this point, we knew we had made the right strategic choices overall. And the only remaining question was, can we hit our deadline? When can we launch this new brand of the world and return to our regularly scheduled programming? Now, a fixed date and a fixed scope are not a winning combination. And we were stressed because we couldn't seem to find a way to punt on anything because a brand isn't something you can turn partway on. All of our pages needed to be in on the action. We had 2 levers we could pull, the date and the scope. We didn't want to shift the date. We didn't know how to shift the scope. We were kind of stuck. So maybe just to lift our spirits, we looked at everything we'd already done. We used view variants to great effect. Now had this secret rebrand mode that internal employees were testing behind a feature flag. And while reliving the insight that led to this, we had this moment of clarity, deja vu, or I don't know, it may have been amnesia. We could use the exact same technique again to make a lighter weight reskin mode. So with just a few tweaks to that variant logic that we started with, we wired up a switch that teams could flip to reskin a page. So they could drop in this one line of code, just say use reskin mode, and in the controller. And then that page would get new colors, new font, and some breathing room. This wasn't responsive, this was just a reskin, but what it let us do was get on brand enough. It was no longer gonna be the end of the world if a certain page or section couldn't solve every technical problem by the launch deadline. And it yielded surprisingly good results. So what we started doing was prioritizing the most important, highly trafficked sections of the site, and actually chose to leave some deprecated systems reskinned permanently until their ultimate demise and deletion from the code base. Most importantly, we had decoupled done from launched. Constraint really is a wonderful thing. We were debriefing after the launch, and we pondered how we would have arrived at these results in our normal iterative processes. We're not sure that we would have. I mean, definitely not nearly as creatively and efficiently. We shipped more code full of better ideas more quickly than we thought was possible. We actually eliminated far more debt than we created. We not only hit our birthday launch goal, but we were relaxed enough on that day that some of us may or may not have been sound asleep when we flipped that feature flag on. So constraints ultimately improved the plan and improved our results quantifiably. So there are many reasons to be careful when intensifying efforts around project deadlines. By definition, you're subverting that notion of a sustainable development pace. And it's a fantastic way to turn working software into not so working software. So we analyzed our pull request stats during and after the project. Because we were doubling down on the design system, the style closet repository saw the most dramatic spike. 247 pull requests represented 49% of style closet pull requests ever. But the first half had been spread over 2.5 years, not 54 days. We actually shipped 44 version releases. So we were releasing every workday, basically. Then we launched and went immediately back to normal. But even accounting for recoil and recuperation, this reflects a lack of panicky show-stopping bugs. With Betterment.com, you see a calm before the storm because we knew all of the existing content was on its way out. Then you see this huge spike. We built a new WordPress theme using our new design system, and then we turned that on launch day. And then again, immediately back to normal. Last, you see our retail app. And this is part of a repository that contains many other apps, so there's not as clear of a signal here. There's a delayed spike, mostly because we were waiting on the design system, but also because we did rush to hit that deadline. But then we're immediately below normal after launch. So we told ourselves, hey, it's easier to work in the new world, although it was also the start of summer. But this is exactly what we hope to see. Let's look at the CSS that we wrote itself. The CSS rules are all assigned a numeric specificity. The highest score wins. In the case of a tie, the last rule wins. Harry Roberts of CSS Wizardry came up with this notion of a specificity graph. On the x-axis, he plots the rules in order of their position in the cascade. On the y-axis, plots specificity. And he mused that, loosely speaking, the line should be smooth and trend upward, ideally. Because if you write a dodgy rule, the poor, unfortunate rules that come after it will have to fight back, and that'll show up in the form of a jagged graph indicating developer pain. So on the left, you see Style Closet 1, with some of our better CSS, not great, but not bad. On the right, you see Style Closet 2, and it's visibly better, smoother, much lower specificity, but it's fun to see and explain the graph features. So you see at the beginning is the CSS reset. We're using normalize, we're very flat. We have a little bump for a debug visualizer. This first tangle you see is actually old form CSS that we did not rewrite during this project. And then at the end, all of our utility classes, which are important by design so that our apps can use them freely in their markup and be assured that they win. This same analysis is so much cooler in our retail app. So on the left is old, gnarly CSS that was no fun to work with. On the right, though, this is basically entirely Style Closet. The in-app CSS is like way over on the right. The system to app ratio is fantastic. What we built in this project took dramatically less work in the app to build features using the new system. That's quality. Let's look at some quantity. Way down, way down. About 10,000 lines down to 2,000 lines in our retail app, and this is on par with what we saw in the Betterment.com WordPress theme. 12,000 down to 2,000-ish. Now remember, this is not just matching functionality. The new code base supports dramatically improved responsive user experiences. And we're moving more quickly with all the components that we shipped. So now, let's look at payload size. In a nutshell, there's more system, there's way less app. So during this project, our design system CSS payload went up about 57% gzip from 23 to 36K, but it was more than offset by a 54% reduction in our retail app payload. Basically, far less CSS over the wire when you're considering the application experience. And our experimental Style Closet 3 builds are weighing in around 24K. We're optimizing things and we're getting back down to the original payload size. So with all of that behind us, what are we doing with our newfound leisure time? So standardizing all of these view patterns across our apps freed up a lot of time and creative energy. We integrated Webpack pipelines into all of our apps. We've since shipped a Rails component framework. It's inspired by modern JavaScript frameworks. Establishes a clean foundation for our hybrid front-end architecture, in which Rails, Stimulus, and React are each playing a part. And we're rebuilding form interactions, animation frameworks, data visualizations, lots of features, all based on the system that we launched last year, which has been improving by the day ever since. So I was listening to this James Corden interview where he relayed something that his dad used to say, that the difference between doing something and not doing something is doing something. We accomplished impractical things on a seemingly impossible time frame, all because we made a decision to just do something. We committed to shipping something, and we committed to finding clever compromises to do so, even though we had no idea what they'd be. Now, all of these stories I've shared about dozens of people, 8 action-packed, at times stressful weeks, full of problems and changes, and mistakes and inventions, and distractions and debates. We didn't lose our cool, and we had a lot of fun, because nothing beats tackling these sorts of tricky problems with good people. So thanks.
All right, Chris, now you're going to have to use this microphone.
All right.
You're a pro. We're going to throw this microphone to the audience if they have questions.
Sounds good. And this talk was for RailsConf, so I stayed largely technically in the Rails side of things, but feel free to ask questions about Rails or non-Rails, design things, engineering things, whatever you'd like.
Hold on.
Thank you. So a question for around the Chrome extensions that you showed. I was just hoping that you could talk a little bit more about what they do, how they work, how useful they are in day-to-day for you guys, that kind of thing.
Sure. In case that doesn't make it on the video, Luke was asking about the Chrome extensions that we built to visualize the design system patterns and components for the grid and content slots. In short, they're amazingly useful. They, when any person on any team, regardless of their level of familiarity with front-end development in general or Betterment in general if they're new, the first thing that we can do is ask, or any design system like team member that's helping them can say, like, have you installed the Chrome extension? Okay, install it. Click this button, and you can immediately see, like, is this lined up or not? And just get a real sense of whether things are there or not. And then kind of implicitly bake that into people's day-to-day workflow more and more. We built it, right now it's very simple vanilla JavaScript, and it just toggles some visualization class selectors. Because we're all using the same components, we have content slot components that have a specific selector, and then we have content grid components that have a certain selector, and we have visualized variants of them. And so it's as simple as toggling a CSS class to get them on. I've seen the New York Times has a really neat, it's actually built as a React component that kind of sits in DOM, that has some other techniques to like change the color of the visualizations depending on what you're looking at and so on. So we might get snazzier with the underlying tech for it, but we've gotten a lot of mileage out of what was actually a hack day project.
I have one question. You mentioned someone did an audit of your existing design system to get an understanding of it. Who did the audit in terms of like the roles of the people, and how long did it take them to do that?
Sure. So the blend of the people that did the audit of all of our apps, it started initially with a lot of the design leadership. We had about a 4-month stretch when we were doing a lot of work back and forth with the agency choosing a direction. So during that time, we're kind of cross-referencing with the type of content that the new brand would be applied to. The agency was concentrating mostly on our public Betterment.com site. So the internal team was concentrating primarily on the apps and kind of going through just analyzing nav and tables and visualizations and that sort of thing. I guess when the rubber hit the road, it was about 1 or 2 weeks in the first third of that like 8-week stretch was when we started to be confident that we had an architectural direction and that something would be launchable in the 2-month-ish time frame if we figure it out, like the right scoping of the pile of stuff. So that's when we kind of determined it. But the real saving grace for preserving the launch date was the reskin mode. I don't remember off the top of my head how many sections used that, but over the coming days and weeks, we just flipped on more and more sections until the only things left were the deprecated things. So that also eased the auditors' stress levels.
How big was the team that worked on this project?
We ran ahead with a task force of about 4 or 5 people. It was like 2 lead designers and 1 other engineer and me that were basically in the 8 weeks. By the way it breaks down is that I personally did about 2 weeks of lots of prototyping, and then 2 other engineers joined me for 2 weeks. And then at that 4-week-ish point in time, we were ready to have the teams start rebranding sections of the app with the guidance that we provided them. So when the teams all kicked in, we changed, we made an exception to our usual workflow. So for those 4 weeks, that's why we were so adamant about trying to keep a scope and find a date, was that we took all of our squads off of the usual product cycle for 4 weeks. So during those 4 weeks, there would have been about 30 to 40 web engineers or full stack engineers that were applying this brand either to the Rails apps or building the WordPress front end.
Cool. Questions? Comments?
I'd be interested to know who here works with feature flags for either like split testing, multivariate testing, or dark deploying. Like raise your hand if you do. Okay, so it's maybe a little under half. The rest of you who did not, if you're interested in that, I would just say it's probably a lot easier to get going than you might think. And even if you're not using it to perform research on your customers, you can use it to find ways to slice up code and ship little tiny bits really effectively. I don't know if anyone else has thoughts on that.
Yes, I enjoy it when we have it implemented. When we don't, I'm like, why don't we have that in there?
Did y'all have any accessibility requirements that this did or did not help with?
The short answer is, I could either say no, or I could say it did not change. It did not change. It definitely put us in a better position to improve our accessibility. And that's actually something that we're working on right now. And it's, as you might imagine, an order of magnitude easier now that we have, even in our Rails view layer, that we have components, so we have a single source of truth for a component's template, which means we can optimize or fix a component that is inaccessible and have that change propagate in a way across all of our apps that was not possible before we had that architecture in place. The rebrand was a good initial step in that, and then we followed on in the summer with the actual Rails components. And then as we move into React stuff, we're kind of thinking the same thing. So that's actually a this year project.
Cool. Thank you. Do you have any questions for the audience? You got their time.
I would be curious, the other biggie is, who here works with the design system of some variety at their work? If you could raise your hand. There's some XO group people.
There's one. There's not that many. It's only 3 of us here.
Yes, yeah, so that's. Yeah, it's true. It's a funny thing to try to define, but
I feel like I feel like, so for me, it's like when each team and each application just design their own styles in a way that maybe corresponded to some visual designs, but there wasn't anything else that tied it together. There was never any code that was really shared. To me, that's not really design system. That's like, we have design. Yeah.
Yeah. I'd say if you're copy pasting markup, or if you're pixel pushing, that's a sign that you're not on a design system, or the designs aren't kind of being expressed in a cohesive way. But in my experience, that's the norm. Like it's not something to feel bad about. But if you can start to make strides in those directions, to start to share some of those units, it makes a big difference, depending on the size and variety of your team. But
yeah, we had struggles for, like, not struggles, but for the last probably 4 years from when we started. We had made an attempt, but then that only would share CSS. And what we found is that the great majority of the applications that are overwriting that CSS, so that specificity graph that you show is really interesting, because it's all specificity down the line. And then we had to come back almost literally from scratch, from like an underground secret project internally, and coming around and saying, like, no, we need to share more than just that. And then building up a lot of reasoning between designers and engineers. Like, if you have to customize a thing, like, there's something going on with your thinking about a design system. Like, maybe don't.
Yeah, one of the things we found ourselves saying really early and often in the process for this project was, designers were worried that because they didn't yet know what they wanted the final designs to look like, that we would sort of be constraining them, saying, like, you need to bake something now, you need to make these decisions now, so that we can, achieve some code reuse. And then they were worried that, as they would inevitably iterate, that we wouldn't be able to kind of apply that. So what we found ourselves saying a lot is, we're not trying to say no to anything. We're trying to find a way to say yes to whatever design it is that's coming next. And so we were very clear that we were building things in an extensible fashion, but in an organized fashion, so that it didn't matter if it got the spacing scale changed several times, the typography scale changed several times, but all we were doing was changing, some items in our case, a Sass config map, and then a bunch of new utility classes were generated and functions were exposed, and then they'd go touch up the design. So that part, once we got used to that, everyone, kind of got in the swing.
Agreed. All right. Hang on.
Yeah, we've been talking a lot about at my work about design systems, actually from the point of view of the designers instead of the coders. And a lot of them really like them for design purposes because they make refactoring and thinking about the design much simpler than trying to, I guess, pixel push and sketch and stuff like that. So I think it has a lot of value, not just for the code base and the coders, but the designers themselves. And I think once they embrace the systematic approach, they kind of see the benefits, especially for a big rebranding project where you're, manipulating things quite a bit.
Yeah, I agree entirely. One of the things that has been neat to see over the year is as the design team, not just the leads, as the design team in general across the board gets more used to working this way, the types of conversations that people are having, like instead of a lead designer going to help a less experienced or new designer kind of move a bunch of stuff around, their starting line is way further down the road. And we're working out a sketch symbol library that's shared so they can just, kind of pull from a menu to start assembling. All of the artboards are set and we've got a bunch of components that are set. So it's really helpful at that stage of the game. And then we're trying to not consider it a handoff process between from a designer to an engineer. I'm trying to have a lot more fluid pairing on that phase of things. But regardless of the shape of that, when the design is either is annotated in some way that says it's this component and we're padding with this size and then there's this component, obviously it gets built faster. So no one was really dead set against it, but it is really neat to see people get increasingly enthusiastic about it as, we're at about the 11-month mark of the new world.
So speaking of designers, did any of them, the way designers are, they get really bored really quick, and they seem to leave projects when
Designers
things
are
get
the
very
worst.
when things get very boring, Also, did you have trouble hiring new designers because of this process? Because it is a bit, I know it's not limiting per se, but it feels like that.
That's interesting. So I obviously joke when I say designers are the worst. What we have found, and I love digging into this process, design tooling is kind of rough. I'll say that. And working with a bunch of teams that are trying to coordinate, that's tricky. What we have found is we have not had trouble hiring because of this. If anything, we're just we have been trying to improve how we teach everyone. We built a bunch of stuff quickly, we prototyped a bunch of stuff quickly, and then have just been getting progressively more organized. And now we're to the point where we have a really good doc site for everything with usage guidelines, with code samples for how to use it in Rails or non-Rails apps, and we're starting to offer workshops for new hires, engineers, designers, interactive sort of how do you build a component. So I think the trickiest concept, regardless of the discipline, designer or engineer, is getting everybody to think of composing the application interfaces out of components. The worst problems we've been having is that some designers just make a design in Sketch and hand it to someone, and it's not quite using the system and it's not annotated. So that's the sort of thing that we're working on, but there's not been any upheaval or mutiny or anything like that.
Also, it feels like your business is going from a startup to an actual almost corporate kind of product where in a startup world, everything is chaos basically, and then once you start growing a business 3, 4, or 5 years into it, it seems to start getting a structure, and it's getting more corporate. That's another reason why I guess it might be a little more difficult to hire. It's not so much your process; it's just that as your business. Never mind. It's more of a business talk than.
I hear what you're saying, but what we have found is that this kind of gets back to what I was saying about so yes, we were adding in process to some of our initial design decision-making processes. But what we have found is that, first of all, we've done it in a really communicative, extensible way. So we've changed our mind about a whole bunch of stuff. And the one sort of like, the only promise I had to sort of make architecturally before we underwent any of this, in our initial prototypes months before this project started, was that like we will be able to go faster, not slower. And we will be able to spend more time on like fun, exciting problems as opposed to, we need to like get this table on this page again, and why is that? And, it's not lined up right. It's supposed to be this. Oh wait, no, we changed it in that design. Like no designer, especially really apparently discerning designers that you're trying to hire, are enjoy doing those sorts of like solving the same problem over and over and over again. So what we've been able to do is start to bake certain solutions and then build on them, build more exciting stuff on them. They're like way happier to be working on the animation framework right now than on like aligning that table again. And everyone's happy because like we're actually also fixing right now we're fixing our tables and our lists and like I said, we didn't rewrite our form elements, so we're finally getting around to that. Yeah. So like we're doing some of that work as well, but
it's mostly like my problem. I'm trying to like kind of like as my company is growing and getting more business, like the people that you attract are different. So the conversation I was having was more about like the problems I'm having and how is your company doing. Sorry.
Gotcha.
I'm sorry.
So considering that your outcome is quite predictable now, when you roll out a new feature, what level of testing do you actually do each time?
Interesting. So the question is about the level of testing that we do given our more predictable outcomes with the systems we built. The changes in our testing processes are in the, I'd say, near future. There's a few things that we gained during this process. Like I said, a lot of the systems generated classes now have tests on them. So we have a lot of, we have a lot more understanding of the, like that we won't accidentally ship a change to the design system that would break every app in some way. What we're looking forward to is adding component level testing as we build more and more components. Our actual testing practices, I'd say in the past year have just kind of iteratively improved. We're still kind of thinking of them mostly at the application level, and as far as the UI is concerned, like that level of testing the views, we're doing mostly like Rails feature specs, acceptance style testing. As we start to build more modern JavaScript components this coming year, we're going to add in some component focused unit testing, some state store focused unit testing and that sort of thing. This, I think, mostly has saved us time in ways that we were not measuring like quantitatively. We just knew like that used to take a few days and now it doesn't. And there's like far less worry about the way something is going to look when it goes out the door if we have forgotten to log in as this type of user, that sort of thing.
So for now, you're still testing everything the same way, it's just faster and easier.
Yeah, the development is much faster and there's far less risk of inadvertent divergence from a design. And by this time next year, hopefully we have a very different answer to your question.
Hey, Chris, I wanted to ask you about the discussions of choosing a front-end framework. And the reason I'm asking you that is because I feel there are companies that are changing their front end to React without actually doing an analysis for the benefits. They're just doing it because it's the hottest thing out right now. So, or the hottest new technology out right now. So can you tell us a little bit about the discussions at Betterment of the benefits for choosing a React front-end framework?
Sure, and that's, I agree with your framing of that decision-making process. I think a lot of companies are just saying, we're gonna do something new, it's React, that's what everybody's doing. That is not what we did, and we're also at the very beginning stages of really kind of exercising the new patterns. I have a lot of experience and think tremendously fondly of Ember, which is not in many of the articles that are talking about these sorts of systems and animation techniques and design system and component testing and so on. Like a lot of the articles just say like React and Vue and Angular, but nobody uses Angular anymore. Like if you're painting with broad strokes, like that's kind of like the unfair characterization of the picture. The biggest architectural consideration that drove our decision-making process was that we were not introducing a single-page app architecture at this time to any of our existing apps. We may and will replace some of our like standalone utilities and calculators, and maybe in the future will. But for now, the new JavaScript that we're introducing is meant to enhance certain pieces of certain pages. The term I've heard for the pattern is called islands of richness. So what we're starting to do is, whether it's the Rails app or a brochure app, like a WordPress app, the server rendered page, and it'll set aside certain placeholder divs with a certain convention. And then our React little tiny app with effective code splitting will kind of zap in the components that take their position in the different islands on the page. And so we were looking, for us, that was sparing, you know, additional detail. React and Vue seemed the most suited. We wanted an active community with lots of add-on, like a rich ecosystem that we could dip into. We wanted effective code splitting so that we could really just get the JavaScript we needed for a specific page. And we wanted a framework that was quite adept at just setting up shop in any host DOM node. So that kind of loosely narrowed it to React or Vue, and we just felt React was a bigger, more active community. That's it. I like that there's a lot of people that are not nearly discerning enough about that process, I think.
And one last question. Can you tell about RailsCon? Is there a interesting feature you saw about Rails 5.2 that you really liked, or any workshop you attended that was really interesting?
Let's see. We're just hopping on to Rails 5.1 right now. I forget what 5.2 brings. I don't know. I'll have to ask a coworker. I know someone who will know.
Luke, you had your hand up.
Just to follow up on the question about testing that was asked earlier, I was curious if you thought that there was an opportunity to improve even the feature level tests based on a better common language that's emerged from the design system, or if it's not quite enough, it's not really at the kind of feature level language or not.
If I understand correctly, we're looking to do two things, one of which will, you know, be when we're shipping actual JavaScript components. But the other that I think is what you're getting at is with the common design language and the notion of components, what we would like to do, even with our existing test stack, is set up some visual regression testing on, if not the design system docs site itself, some pages that render known components in a certain way, so that we'd get a pretty big yield, a pretty big return on that type of test, where if we know that at the system level, if this component looks this way and this component looks this way and this component looks this way, and the only changes that happen are intentional, then we can be way more confident than ever before that all of the apps using these things are kind of composing things without the rug being pulled out from under them. So we are there's lots of people that are excited about doing that, and we haven't done any of the work yet.
Plus one on that. If you want to talk, I can connect you with our design system team, because they've been thinking and doing something about that for the last few months. 10% project, hack
Awesome.
project, but I think they're on the right track and like building that thing, which gives that level of confidence.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Quick question. If you would have to create Betterment today, would you kind of like lean more towards a single page app? I know, you know, that there is obviously some technical debt. You have to consider shifting to a single page app in your whatever legacy code. Do you think that there is some kind of an evolution in which there is a very tight, very disciplined separation nowadays?
You will get different answers to that question based on who you ask at Betterment. So yes, I know. So I joined about a year and a half ago, and we actually still have some portions of the app that are, if you go into this corner, you'll see something that is being served with our Backbone Marionette apps that we built at the same time that everyone else was building Backbone Marionette apps. The teams, as the stories have been relayed to me, got into the same sets of problems that everybody did with the architectural patterns that were favored at the time, but did not yet know how to make an informed decision about like a single page app framework replacement. So it kind of did, it was retreated to like a simpler architecture while we like ported. There were also some back end changes that we were doing at the same time. So we kind of ported off of that front end, got some other things sorted out so that the Rails app was just generally much simpler. And then we started talking about what the future might look like. With all of that context, it depends. If like we get a lot of mileage out of a good conventional server rendered framework. So if we did not have that, I imagine that like my personal preferences are there's all sorts of way more mature patterns in the JavaScript ecosystem that check all of the boxes. Regardless, I would want the front end using an API to communicate with whatever is like with whatever servers it is talking to. So it'll depend. I don't know if that's too much of a hedge or if it's a good enough answer.
No, I feel that it's like, it's kind of like something that many people around us, I'm sure, are thinking of. And I don't think there is a bottom line here. I think it's very project dependent. There is a lot of advantages of velocity in terms of, creating a controller and dumping some, even if there is a design system, the ability to communicate with that controller and in a very agile manner, incrementally develop things on it, but then eventually, obviously, scaling and kind of like being able to create it in a more modular way is going to get some issues. So I guess it's like a philosophy or a flavor thing,
Right, and then also the blend of the team's skill set. So one of the biggest reasons that I stayed more Ruby centric was the teams in place at the time. Huge wins with the component architecture. So if I had to start fresh, I would not build my front end with Rails, but there's plenty of places, including Betterment, where it's working wonderfully and will for the foreseeable future.
All right, other questions? Thank you so much. Please give Chris a warm round of applause. Thank you, Chris. This was an awesome presentation. If you'd like to give a presentation here, please go to github.com/NYC.rb. That's our organization. There's a DevPunks repo there. File an issue. I want to give a talk. This is my summary. I'll also post what I'm talking about right now on the meetup. I'm going to be a little bit repetitive about it just because I feel like repetitive is good because everyone gets the idea. And I want all of you to submit talks and educate us, particularly me, because I just need to be educated all the time. Okay, thank you all for coming. The only thing that's changed since we last talked about Goruko is that there's now a special code just for all of you. If you go to goruko.com, you buy a ticket, NYC.rb gives you a discount. I feel like it's much simpler than, How much discount? A good amount. It's an amazing conference. It is like only $400 for the full price ticket. You get a discount from that. I see only compare this to any other conference. Come on, please. All right. Thank you all. Yeah, feel free to mingle for a few minutes. If you can, just your beer and things, dump them into the appropriate basket that these things go to, and have a great night.